A 72-year-old grandmother stole over $2.3 million from successful men across 3 states, and not a single one of them reported her to the police. Why? Because they never saw it coming. They thought they were talking to a beautiful 34-year-old photographer. They thought they were in love. By the time they realized the truth, their bank accounts were empty, and she had vanished into thin air. This is the most sophisticated catfishing operation I've ever investigated, and what makes it truly disturbing is how perfectly she executed every single step. Before we dive into this, drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I need to know where my viewers are tonight. Let me set the scene. March 2019, Seattle, Washington. A 72-year-old woman named Margaret Whitmore sits in her modest house in Tacoma with a laptop, a burner phone, and a plan that would make professional con artists jealous. She's not your typical grandmother. No knitting, no baking cookies. Margaret spent 30 years working as a financial consultant before retiring in 2015. She understands money, she understands people, and most importantly, she understands exactly how to exploit both. Her husband died in 2012, leaving her with a decent pension but nowhere near the lifestyle she'd become accustomed to. Her daughters rarely called. Her grandchildren didn't know her. She had nothing to lose and everything to gain. So on March 15, 2019, Margaret created her first Tinder profile. Her name on the app was Jessica Lane. Age 34. Occupation freelance photographer. The photos were carefully selected from a Romanian fitness influencer named Adriana Popescu, who had over 400,000 followers and would never notice a few stolen images. But Margaret didn't just steal photos. She studied Adriana's entire online presence, her captions, her lifestyle, her personality. She became Jessica Lane. Within 24 hours, Margaret had 127 matches, but she wasn't interested in all of them. She was hunting, searching for specific targets, men with money, men with vulnerability, men who were successful but emotionally isolated. She filtered through profiles like a recruiter screening job applications, software executives, real estate developers, investment bankers, doctors, lawyers. These weren't random guys looking for hookups. These were wealthy, lonely men who had everything except someone to share it with. Her first target was a man named Richard Caldwell, 48 years old, partner at a Seattle law firm specializing in corporate litigation, divorced 3 years earlier, no kids, lived alone in a downtown penthouse worth $2.8 million. His Tinder profile showed him at charity galas, on yacht trips, holding expensive whiskey. He was screaming money. Margaret swiped right. They matched instantly. She didn't message him first. That would seem desperate. She waited. Let him come to her. 3 hours later, Richard sent the first message. "Hey Jessica, love your smile. You seem genuinely interesting. Most profiles on here are so fake." Margaret smiled. If only he knew. She responded casually. "Thanks, Richard. You seem pretty genuine yourself. Not many lawyers on here with actual personality." They talked for 2 weeks. Small talk at first, favorite restaurants, travel stories, movies, books. Margaret had done her research. She knew Richard had recently posted on LinkedIn about a major case win, knew he'd just returned from a business trip to New York. She wove those details into conversation naturally, congratulated him, asked about the trip, made him feel seen. Then she started planting seeds, mentioned casually that she was struggling financially. Her photography business had been slow lately. Rent was coming up and she was stressed. She didn't ask for money, just mentioned it. Let it hang in the air. Richard, being the successful lawyer who loved playing hero, immediately offered to help. "Jessica, if you need anything, seriously, let me know. I've been where you are." Margaret declined. "Oh my God, no, I couldn't. That's so sweet, but I'll figure it out." She knew that rejecting his first offer would make him try harder, and he did. Over the next 3 weeks, Richard brought it up 4 more times. Finally, Margaret agreed to let him lend her $1,500 for rent. She promised to pay him back as soon as her next photography gig came through. Sent him her Venmo. He transferred the money within minutes, felt like a hero. Margaret thanked him profusely, sent him a voice message that she'd carefully edited to sound young and grateful. "You have no idea how much this means to me, Richard. I promise I'll pay you back. You're literally saving my life right now." Richard didn't want the money back. He wanted Jessica. They kept talking. The conversations got deeper, more intimate. He told her about his ex-wife who'd cheated on him with his business partner, about his 70-hour work weeks, about how lonely it was at the top. Margaret listened, validated his feelings, made him feel understood. Then she mentioned another financial problem. Her car needed repairs. $2,800. She was devastated. Didn't know what to do. Richard sent the money before she even finished explaining. This time he didn't call it a loan. He just said, "Take care of yourself, Jessica. You deserve better than this stress." Margaret had him hooked. Over the next 4 months, Richard sent her money 7 more times. $3,200 for camera equipment for a big photography job. $5,000 when she said her mother was sick and needed surgery. $4,500 for a business opportunity that would supposedly let her expand her photography studio. $1,800 for dental work after a supposed accident. Every single time, Margaret had a perfectly crafted story. Medical records she'd photoshopped, fake invoices, fabricated emergencies that tugged at his heartstrings and his wallet. By August 2019, Richard had sent Jessica over $24,000, and he still hadn't met her in person. Every time he suggested meeting up, she had an excuse. She was traveling for work, her mother's health crisis. She was dealing with a stalker ex-boyfriend and didn't feel safe meeting anyone yet. Richard was patient, understanding. He'd wait as long as it took because Jessica was worth it. But Margaret wasn't just running this con on Richard. She had 9 other men on the hook simultaneously. Each one thought he was in an exclusive relationship with Jessica Lane. Each one was sending money. She had a system more organized than most businesses. A spreadsheet with columns for names, occupations, net worth estimates, amounts sent, emotional vulnerabilities, and risk levels. She'd spend 3 hours every morning managing her targets, rotating through conversations, keeping stories straight, planting new financial needs, collecting payments. One target was named Michael Preston, 52 years old, owned a successful chain of car dealerships across Washington and Oregon, worth an estimated $12 million, widower. Lost his wife to cancer in 2017, still grieving, still lonely. Tinder was his sad attempt at moving on. Then Jessica liked his profile. They started talking in May 2019. Margaret immediately recognized Michael was a bigger fish than Richard. She adjusted her approach, went slower, built more trust, spent 6 weeks just talking before even mentioning money. Let him fall completely in love with the idea of Jessica. When she finally mentioned her first financial problem, it wasn't small. She told Michael her father had died unexpectedly and she needed $8,000 for funeral expenses. She was devastated, crying in her voice messages. Michael didn't hesitate, sent $10,000, told her to use the extra for herself, to take time to grieve. Margaret thanked him. Disappeared for 3 days to make it seem like she was genuinely dealing with the loss. Then came back stronger, more vulnerable, more dependent on Michael's emotional support. Over the next 7 months, Michael sent Jessica over $67,000, money for her struggling photography business, money for her mother's ongoing medical treatments, money for legal fees when she said her landlord was trying to evict her illegally, money for a down payment on a new apartment in a safer neighborhood. Every single dollar came with a perfectly constructed story, documents, photos, details that made it impossible to doubt. And Michael never doubted. He was in love. He'd found someone who made him feel alive again after 2 years of grief and numbness. Margaret's system was brilliant because she understood psychology. She knew these men weren't stupid. They were smart, successful, careful with money in their professional lives. But emotionally, they were desperate, lonely, craving connection, and that desperation made them blind. She also knew timing. Never asked for money too frequently. Spaced out requests by weeks, sometimes months. Made each emergency feel genuine and unexpected. And she never asked directly, always just mentioned the problem, let them offer, made them feel like heroes, like they were choosing to help rather than being manipulated. By December 2019, Margaret was managing 14 different targets across Tinder, Bumble, and Hinge. She'd created 3 different personas: Jessica Lane, the photographer, Melissa Hart, the yoga instructor, and Sarah Chen, the freelance graphic designer. Each persona had stolen photos from different influencers. Each had a detailed backstory. Each was milking multiple men for thousands of dollars. Margaret had turned catfishing into a full-time criminal enterprise, and she was making more money than she ever did as a financial consultant. Then came 2020, the pandemic, lockdowns, isolation, dating apps exploded, lonely people were everywhere. Margaret's business skyrocketed, men stuck at home, working remotely, desperate for human connection. She was getting 200 matches per week across all her profiles, but she stayed disciplined, only pursued the ones with money, the executives, the business owners, the professionals who posted vacation photos in expensive locations. One of her biggest scores was a man named David Park, 44 years old, VP of technology at a major Seattle-based software company, salary over $400,000 a year, stock options worth millions, divorced, shared custody of 2 kids, living alone in a Bellevue mansion. David matched with Melissa Hart in April 2020. They talked every single day for 9 months. Margaret made Melissa sweet, caring, spiritual. A yoga instructor who believed in energy and healing and finding inner peace. David ate it up. He was burned out, stressed, working 80-hour weeks managing remote teams. Melissa became his escape, his calm in the chaos. Margaret waited 4 months before Melissa mentioned money. When she finally did, it was big. She told David her yoga studio was going under because of the pandemic. She'd invested everything into it, her life savings. She was about to lose it all. She was devastated, didn't know what to do. David offered to help immediately. How much do you need? Melissa said $35,000 would save the studio, cover rent and utilities for 6 months while she rebuilt. David hesitated for maybe 2 seconds, then transferred $40,000, told her to use the extra to take care of herself. Melissa thanked him, promised to pay him back, sent him photos of the supposedly struggling yoga studio, photos Margaret had stolen from a closed yoga business in Portland. David felt good, felt like he'd saved something beautiful, saved someone beautiful. Over the next 5 months, David sent Melissa another $58,000. Money for equipment, money for marketing, money for a personal crisis when Melissa's brother supposedly got arrested and needed bail. David sent every dollar without question because he loved her, because Melissa made him feel like he mattered. But Margaret made a mistake with David. She got greedy. In February 2021, Melissa asked for $75,000, said her landlord was selling the studio building and she had a chance to buy it, secure her future. David paused. That was a lot of money, more than he'd sent anyone for anything. He said he needed to think about it. Margaret panicked, pushed too hard, had Melissa send desperate voice messages, crying, begging, saying she'd lose everything if he didn't help. That behavior made David suspicious. He'd never seen Melissa act this way. It felt off. David did what he should have done months ago. Reverse image searched Melissa's photos. Every single one came back to a Brazilian wellness influencer with 890,000 Instagram followers. David felt sick. He'd been scammed, lost over $98,000 to a fake yoga instructor. He was furious, humiliated, felt like an idiot, wanted to call the police. But then he thought about the optics. A VP at a major tech company admitting he'd been catfished out of nearly 6 figures. The embarrassment. The damage to his reputation. His ex-wife would use it against him in custody battles. His company would question his judgment. So David did what most of Margaret's victims did. Nothing. He blocked Melissa, deleted his dating apps, ate the loss, and never spoke about it to anyone. That was Margaret's genius. She didn't just steal money. She stole money from people who couldn't afford to admit they'd been scammed. Successful men, proud men, Men whose reputations and careers depended on appearing smart and in control. They'd rather lose the money than lose face, and Margaret knew that, counted on it. If you're hooked on this story and want to see more cases like this, hit that subscribe button right now. This channel is all about the cons and criminals nobody talks about. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming. By mid-2021, Margaret had stolen over $1.2 million from 31 different men. She'd moved the money carefully. Multiple bank accounts, cryptocurrency, offshore transfers. She wasn't sloppy. She'd planned every step, covered her tracks, changed phones every few months, used VPNs, rotated profiles. She was running a criminal operation with the precision of a Fortune 500 company. But every operation has cracks. In September 2021, two of her victims accidentally met each other. Richard Caldwell, the lawyer, and Marcus Thompson, a 50-year-old real estate developer who'd sent Jessica over $43,000. They were both at a networking event in Seattle. Got to talking over drinks, started sharing war stories. Marcus jokingly mentioned he'd been talking to this girl on Tinder who kept having financial emergencies. Beautiful photographer named Jessica. Richard froze, asked Marcus to describe her. Show a photo. Marcus pulled out his phone. Same woman, same name, same backstory, same financial emergencies. They both realized they'd been scammed by the same person. Started digging. Posted in Seattle business groups asking if anyone else had been talking to Jessica Lane. Within 48 hours, they had responses from 8 different men. All victims, all too embarrassed to have reported it, all angry. Together, they'd lost over $340,000. They hired a private investigator, former FBI agent named Rick Donovan, who specialized in cyber fraud. Gave him everything. Screenshots, phone numbers, payment records, Venmo transactions. Rick traced the money. Followed digital breadcrumbs through banks and cryptocurrency exchanges and shell companies. It took him 6 weeks, but he found her. Margaret Ann Whitmore, 73 years old, living in a modest house in Tacoma that didn't match the money she'd stolen. Rick dug deeper. Found that Margaret had been moving money to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, buying gold, converting cash to assets that couldn't be easily traced. She wasn't spending it on mansions and sports cars. She was hiding it, protecting it, planning for the long game. The victims wanted justice, wanted their money back, wanted Margaret arrested. But there was a problem. Proving fraud is complicated. Margaret never explicitly promised to pay the money back, never signed contracts. All her communication was through dating apps and voice messages that could be deleted. The money was sent voluntarily. Sure, it was obtained through lies, but getting that to stick in court was nearly impossible. And then there was the embarrassment factor. Most of the victims didn't want their names attached to a public case, didn't want depositions and trials and news coverage about how they'd been scammed by a grandmother on Tinder. Rick went to Margaret's house in November 2021, knocked on her door. She answered. He introduced himself, told her he knew everything, showed her the evidence. Margaret didn't panic, didn't deny it, just invited him inside. They sat in her small living room and she told him the truth. She'd done it all. Stolen over $1.2 million from lonely men who should have known better. She said it with no remorse, no guilt, just cold calculation. Rick asked why. Margaret said, because I could. Because these men were easy targets. Because loneliness makes people stupid. Because I spent my entire life playing by the rules and ended up alone in a cold house with nothing. Rick told her the victims were considering pressing charges. Margaret laughed, said, go ahead, make it public. Let the world know that successful men got scammed by a 73-year-old woman. Let their colleagues and ex-wives and business partners find out. See how many actually go through with it. Rick knew she was right. She'd built the perfect crime, targeted the perfect victims, people with too much pride to seek justice. But Margaret made one final mistake. She kept going. Even after Rick's visit, even knowing she'd been caught, she was addicted to the money, the control, the power. In January 2022, she targeted a man named Jonathan Wu, 55 years old, hedge fund manager, worth over $40 million, matched with Sarah Chen, Margaret's graphic designer persona. They talked for 3 months. Jonathan fell hard, sent Sarah $120,000 for a supposed business investment opportunity. But Jonathan was smarter than the others. Had his accountant review the investment documents Sarah provided. They were fake. Poorly done. Jonathan immediately knew something was wrong. He didn't confront Sarah. Instead, he hired his own investigator, former Secret Service agent who specialized in financial crimes. Within 2 weeks, they'd traced everything back to Margaret. Jonathan didn't care about embarrassment, didn't care about optics. He wanted blood, pressed charges, filed a lawsuit, made it public. News outlets picked up the story. Grandmother scams hedge fund manager out of 6 figures through Tinder. The story went viral. Other victims started coming forward. The floodgates opened. By March 2022, Margaret was facing 47 counts of wire fraud, identity theft, and theft by deception across 3 states. Total amount stolen, over $2.3 million from 52 confirmed victims. The FBI got involved, froze her accounts, seized her assets, found gold bars hidden in her basement worth $340,000, found cryptocurrency wallets with another $480,000, found offshore accounts with $670,000. She'd moved the money brilliantly, but once the feds were involved, nowhere was safe. Margaret was arrested on March 18, 2022, booked into King County Jail. No bail. Flight risk. The photos of her being led away in handcuffs made national news. A frail-looking grandmother in a cardigan and reading glasses. America couldn't believe it. The comments online were split. Half called her a monster. The other half couldn't stop laughing at the men who'd been scammed. Some called her a genius. Some called her a predator. Everyone had an opinion. Her trial started in August 2022. The prosecution had mountains of evidence, screenshots, financial records, testimonies from 23 victims willing to go public. Margaret's defense attorney tried to paint her as a lonely widow who'd made mistakes, tried to argue she had diminished capacity due to age and grief. The jury didn't buy it. Her operation was too sophisticated, too calculated, too deliberate. On September 29, 2022, Margaret Ann Whitmore was found guilty on all 47 counts. She was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. At 73 years old, it was essentially a life sentence. The judge called her a predator who'd weaponized loneliness for profit, said she'd shown no remorse, no empathy, no understanding of the damage she'd caused. Margaret stood in court and said nothing. No tears, no apologies. Just cold silence. She was transferred to FCI Dublin, a federal women's prison in California, where she remains today. As for the money, victims recovered about 40% through asset seizures. The rest was gone, hidden in accounts they couldn't trace, spent on things that couldn't be recovered. Most victims never got their money back, never got closure, just had to live with the humiliation of being scammed by someone's grandmother. Margaret's daughters gave interviews saying they'd had no idea what their mother was doing, said she'd always been distant, cold, calculating. One daughter said, "I'm not surprised she did this. I'm surprised she got caught." Her grandchildren want nothing to do with her, refuse to visit, refuse to acknowledge her. Margaret Whitmore will die in prison, forgotten by everyone except the men whose lives she destroyed. This case changed how dating apps handle fraud. Tinder and Bumble implemented better verification systems, facial recognition, identity checks. But the truth is, no system can protect against human vulnerability, against loneliness, against the desperate need to believe someone cares. Margaret understood that better than anyone. She knew the real con wasn't stealing photos or creating fake profiles. The real con was making lonely people believe they mattered. And once you do that, taking their money is easy. So what's the lesson here? If someone you've never met in person starts asking for money, run. Doesn't matter how perfect they seem, how well you connect, how much you trust them. If they're real, they'll meet you face to face before asking for a single dollar. And if they won't, You're being scammed. Simple as that. Before you click away, do me a favor. Subscribe to this channel if you want more deep dives into crimes that nobody else is covering. Hit that like button if this story got you hooked, and drop a comment telling me what you think. Was Margaret a criminal genius or just a sad woman who took things too far? I want to know what you think. Margaret Ann Whitmore is 75 years old now, sitting in a prison cell in California. No visitors, no letters, no hope of parole. She'll die behind bars. And somewhere out there, dozens of men are still trying to forget the grandmother who made them believe in love and then emptied their bank accounts. That's the legacy of the Tinder grandma. That's the story nobody wanted to tell. Until now.